Marcus Johnson woke up to the soft rays of sunlight filtering through the curtains of his modest apartment. He squinted at the clock on his nightstand, groaning slightly as he realized it was already 7:30 a.m. Today was going to be busy. As the new CIA director, there were always meetings, reports, and decisions that could shape the course of national security. But before all that, he had his own routine to attend to. He pushed himself out of bed, the familiar creaking of the floorboards accompanying his movements. In the small kitchen, the smell of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the air as he filled a mug to the brim. As he sipped, he glanced out the window, watching the city slowly come to life. Cars honked in the distance, and he could hear the faint chatter of neighbors starting their day. In the kitchen, pictures of his family adorned the walls. His wife, Tanya, with her warm smile and sparkling eyes, and their two children, Aiden and Kayla, who had both inherited Tanya's radiant smile. As he prepared breakfast, he couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and concern. He wanted the best for them, yet he knew the world outside their door was often fraught with challenges, especially for black families like theirs. "Dad, can I have pancakes?" Aiden's voice echoed from the hallway, breaking Marcus's thoughts. Coming right up, he called back, a smile spreading across his face. Cooking breakfast together had become a cherished ritual in their family, one that allowed him to savor the fleeting moments of childhood innocence. After flipping a few pancakes and pouring syrup, Marcus set the table. Tanya joined them, her presence radiating warmth. They shared stories over breakfast, laughter filling the room, momentarily shielding them from the harsh realities of the world outside. As he rushed to get dressed, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had crept into his thoughts. It wasn't just the responsibilities of his job that weighed on him. It was a persistent shadow of racial bias he had faced throughout his life. Even now, with his hard-earned position, he knew that his skin color would always influence how people perceived him. He finished dressing in a navy blue suit, adjusting his tie in the mirror. "You look sharp, Marcus," Tanya called from the living room. "Thanks, babe," he replied, giving himself one last look before heading out the door. The drive to work was uneventful but reflective. As he navigated the bustling streets, he saw the familiar faces of neighbors and friends, each one a reminder of the community he was proud to be part of. Yet, beneath that pride lay an undercurrent of anxiety. He knew the world was not always kind to people who looked like him. Arriving at CIA headquarters, Marcus parked and made his way through the security checks. The routine was second nature by now, but today felt different. Perhaps it was the weight of his responsibilities, or the looming discussions about security threats, or maybe the ongoing dialogue about systemic racism in law enforcement that had captured national attention. He couldn't help but think of how he was expected to represent not just himself, but an entire community. "Morning, Marcus," greeted his colleague James as he entered the office. "Ready for another day of saving the world?" "Always," Marcus replied, mustering a smile. They exchanged pleasantries before Marcus settled into his office. Papers were scattered across his desk, reports on recent operations mixed with briefing notes about ongoing cases. As he flipped through the files, he felt a sense of urgency. There was much to do, and time was fleeting. Later that morning, a meeting was scheduled with several key officials to discuss recent intelligence reports. As Marcus entered the conference room, he noticed a few unfamiliar faces among the regulars. He took his seat, greeting everyone with a nod. The conversation quickly shifted to emerging threats, the tension in the room palpable as they delved into sensitive topics. As the meeting progressed, Marcus found himself reflecting on the balance between his role in national security and the larger societal issues at play. He was determined to make a difference, not just within the agency, but also in the community. Yet, the complexities of his position weighed heavily on him. After the meeting, he stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. Leaning against the wall, he closed his eyes for a moment letting the sun warm his face. But the peace was short-lived. His thoughts shifted back to the world outside. The recent incidents of police brutality flooded his mind, reminding him that systemic racism was a battle he could never escape. As he returned to his office, Marcus steeled himself for the challenges ahead. The day was just beginning, and little did he know, it would soon take a turn that would change everything. Later that day, Marcus decided to take a break from the relentless pace at the CIA headquarters. The walls felt like they were closing in on him, and he needed a breath of fresh air. He opted to run a few errands at a local store, hoping a brief escape would clear his mind and help him regain focus. As he pulled into the parking lot, Marcus noticed a group of officers lingering near the entrance, laughing and chatting among themselves. He brushed it off as he entered the store, the bell chiming softly behind him. The air was filled with the scent of fresh produce and baked goods, a comforting contrast to the weight of his day. He picked up a few items, milk, bread, and some fruits. While walking through the aisles, he glanced at his phone, checking messages from Tanya about dinner plans. As he turned to reach for a box of cereal, he felt a sudden jolt as someone bumped into him. "Watch where you're going, man," a younger officer exclaimed, adjusting his uniform with an arrogant swagger. The other officers around laughed, adding to the mockery. Marcus took a step back, trying to diffuse the tension. "I'm sorry. It was an accident," he replied calmly, hoping to de-escalate the situation. The officer, however, didn't back down. "You got a problem, old man," he sneered, his expression turning hostile. "You look suspicious just standing there." "What do you mean by that?" Marcus asked, keeping his tone even. He felt the heat rising in his chest, a mix of frustration and disbelief at the situation unfolding before him. The group of officers closed in, their laughter fading as they sensed the confrontation. "I think we should check you out," another officer said, stepping forward. "You fit the description of someone we're looking for." "What description?" Marcus asked, genuinely perplexed. He could feel the eyes of other shoppers on him, their curious glances turning into whispers. "Just come with us," the younger officer insisted, his tone bordering on aggressive. "We don't have all day." As the officers grabbed his arms, Marcus felt a surge of panic. This wasn't happening. He was a respected director at the CIA, a man who had devoted his life to service and integrity. Yet, here he was, being treated like a criminal. "Let go of me. You can't just arrest someone without cause," he shouted, drawing the attention of nearby shoppers. Some stared in shock, while others quickly averted their eyes, unsure of how to react. "Stay quiet, or it'll go worse for you," one of the officers warned, tightening his grip. The humiliation was suffocating. Marcus's mind raced as he searched for a way to regain control of the situation. He glanced around, hoping for someone to intervene, but the fear of the officers seemed to paralyze those nearby. "I haven't done anything wrong," he repeated, his voice steady despite the anger boiling within. "Just follow us outside," the younger officer said, shoving him toward the door. The commotion attracted the attention of more officers who rushed in, ready to back up their colleague. Outside, the sun beat down mercilessly as Marcus was forced into the police vehicle. "This is insane," he shouted, struggling against the cuffs that bound his wrists. "You're making a huge mistake." Ignoring his pleas, the officers pushed him into the back seat, slamming the door shut. Marcus's heart raced as he glanced out the window, witnessing the world he knew pass by. A world where he was a respected leader, now reduced to a mere suspect. Inside the car, the officers began to discuss their next steps. "He doesn't look like a criminal, but we should check his background," one officer said, tapping on his computer. "Maybe he's got something we don't know about." Marcus's stomach dropped. They were questioning his very existence, reducing him to a stereotype based solely on the color of his skin. "Look," Marcus interjected, his voice firm but calm, "I need to call my lawyer. I have rights. You can't just keep me like this without cause." The officers exchanged glances, clearly annoyed by his defiance. "You'll get your call, but don't think you're getting out of this," the younger officer sneered. As they drove toward the station, Marcus's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. He had faced discrimination before, but this was different. This was an assault on his identity, his hard work, and the integrity he had built over the years. He felt the walls closing in on him, but he refused to let fear consume him. Arriving at the police station, they pulled him out of the car, still cuffed. Marcus noticed the bustling environment, officers moving about, paperwork piling high on desks, and the sounds of phones ringing. But none of that mattered now. He was about to face a situation that would test every ounce of his resolve. The air inside the police station was thick with tension, a stark contrast to the outside world. As Marcus was led through the dimly lit hallway, he could feel the eyes of officers boring into him, some with judgment, others with indifference. The overwhelming sense of humiliation hung over him like a storm cloud, threatening to rain down the weight of injustice. "Let's get this over with," the younger officer said, shoving him into a small interrogation room. The cold metal table stood in the center, surrounded by hard chairs that felt more like punishment than a place for questioning. Marcus was still cuffed, a reminder that he was, in their eyes, a criminal. As they closed the door, Marcus took a deep breath, trying to center himself. What was happening? The hours of harassment and mistreatment had begun to wear on him, but he refused to give in to despair. He was a man of dignity, and he had worked too hard to let anyone strip that away from him. "Now, let's see what we have here," one of the officers said, sitting down across from him, a smirk creeping across his face. "You're going to tell us what you were doing at the store, and maybe we'll cut you a break." "What do you want to know?" Marcus replied, his voice steady. "I was shopping. I didn't steal anything, and you know it." The officer leaned back in his chair, feigning nonchalance. "You say that, but you were acting suspiciously. People like you always do." "People like me?" Marcus echoed, his voice rising slightly. "You don't even know me. You're judging me based on the color of my skin, not my actions." The officer's demeanor shifted, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "You can't play the race card here. We have a job to do, and you're just making it harder on yourself." The realization hit Marcus hard. This was more than just a misunderstanding. It was an all-too-familiar narrative, a script he had seen play out countless times in the news. The officer leaned in, his tone now serious. "Just tell us who you are. We'll look you up and see if you have any priors." "I'm Marcus Johnson, and I am the director of the CIA," he stated firmly, meeting the officer's gaze without flinching. "I have every right to be treated with respect." For a moment, silence filled the room, the weight of his words hanging in the air. The officer stared at him, disbelief etched across his face. "Yeah, right. You think we're going to believe that?" Marcus sighed, frustration boiling beneath the surface. "Look it up. I'm not here to prove myself to you. I deserve to be treated fairly, just like anyone else. Right? A black man from the neighborhood is the CIA director." The officer scoffed, dismissing him with a wave of his hand. "We'll see about that." As the officer stepped out to check his claims, Marcus felt a surge of anger and helplessness. He had spent years building his career, breaking barriers that many thought were insurmountable. Now, here he was, reduced to a stereotype, subjected to the whims of someone who held all the power in this moment. Time seemed to stretch on as he waited, each second echoing in the small room. He thought of his family, Tanya and the kids, and how they would react to this nightmare. Would they worry? Would they feel ashamed? The thought cut deeper than he expected. When the officer returned, a smug look on his face, he held a printout in his hands. "Well, look who we have here. Mr. Big Shot CIA Director," he said mockingly. You've got quite the resume, don't you? Now that you know who I am, you should also know how serious this is, Marcus replied, his voice low and measured. You can't just detain someone without cause. Cause? You were acting all kinds of suspicious. The officer shot back. Now we can either make this easy, or we can go the hard way. Your choice. Marcus felt the anger boil inside him. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every individual who had ever been mistreated, every family that had ever lived in fear of a system designed to protect them. You think this is funny? He challenged, leaning forward. You're supposed to serve and protect. Instead, you're perpetuating the very problems that make people afraid of you. The officer scoffed, dismissing his words as he began typing on his computer. Whatever you say, Director, he sneered. Let's see how tough you are when we get you in front of a judge. As the minutes dragged on, Marcus's thoughts raced. He needed to remain composed. His position as CIA director could turn the situation around, but he had to stay calm. He refused to allow these officers to rob him of his dignity. Suddenly, the door swung open, and another officer stepped inside. What's going on in here? He asked, clearly sensing the tension. The newcomer's expression changed when he recognized Marcus. Wait, That's right, Marcus interrupted, eager for a glimmer of understanding. I'm the CIA director, and I demand to be treated with respect. The officer glanced at the younger one, who was visibly shaken. Let him go, the newcomer ordered, his voice steady. This is a serious breach of protocol. Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. But the battle wasn't over yet. He had to make sure that the consequences of this encounter reached the right people. He was done being a victim. He was determined to take action, not just for himself, but for everyone who had suffered under a biased system. The tension in the interrogation room began to lift as the newcomer officer stepped in, a familiar weight of authority radiating from him. You're free to go, Mr. Johnson, he said, his tone respectful. We will conduct a thorough investigation into this incident. Marcus felt a mix of relief and lingering anger. He stood up slowly, his wrists aching from the cuffs that had bound him for too long. I appreciate that, but I want more than just an investigation. I want accountability, he replied, meeting the officer's eyes with a determined gaze. This isn't just about me. It's about changing how this department operates. The officer nodded, understanding the gravity of Marcus's words. I agree. We need to ensure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Let's get you out of here. As they walked out of the room, Marcus glanced back at the younger officer, who now looked visibly shaken. He didn't want to gloat, but the victory felt sweet. His dignity had remained intact, and he had managed to assert his authority in a system designed to belittle him. Once outside, Marcus took a deep breath of the fresh air, grateful to be free from the stifling atmosphere of the station. He quickly grabbed his phone, dialing Tanya's number. Hey, it's me, he said when she picked up. I'm okay, but I need to talk to you. Can you meet me at home? Of course, what's going on? Tanya's voice crackled with concern. I'll explain everything when I get there. Just please don't worry, okay? He hung up, his mind racing with thoughts of how to process the events that had just transpired. On his drive home, the world outside seemed to blur past him. The sunlight streamed through the trees, illuminating the path he had traveled countless times. Yet everything felt different now. The normalcy he had always taken for granted had been shattered by a single encounter. Arriving at home, he found Tanya waiting for him in the kitchen. She looked up, worry etched on her face, as she rushed to him. Marcus, what happened? You look like you've seen a ghost. It's been a rough day, he said, wrapping her in a tight embrace. The warmth of her body soothed him, grounding him amidst the chaos. He pulled back, meeting her eyes. I was wrongfully detained by the police. They thought I was a criminal. Tanya's expression darkened, a mix of disbelief and anger. What That's insane. Did you tell them who you are? I did, but it didn't matter at first. They treated me like I was just another statistic, he replied, pacing the floor. It was humiliating, Tanya. I've spent my life fighting to break through barriers, and here I was, reduced to nothing in the eyes of those officers. I can't believe this happened to you, she said, her voice steady. What are you going to do about it? Marcus paused, considering his response. I need to ensure this doesn't happen to anyone else. I want to bring this issue to light, to push for changes in how the police handle situations like mine. Tanya nodded, her expression resolute. You can't let this go. You have the power to make a difference, Marcus. You're not just any man. You're the CIA director. Exactly. I can't just stand by and let this slide. I want to file a formal complaint and call for an internal investigation into the department. They need to understand the impact of their actions, he replied, determination setting in. As the couple discussed their plans, the weight of Marcus's ordeal began to lift. He realized he wasn't alone in this fight. Tanya was right beside him, ready to support him every step of the way. Together, they would navigate the challenges ahead, not just for themselves, but for countless others who had faced similar injustices. That evening, as they sat down to dinner, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling of unease that still lingered. Tanya, do you think they'll listen? He asked, his fork pausing midair. Will my voice make a difference? Tanya reached across the table, placing her hand over his. You have to believe it will. You're not just a voice in the crowd. You're a leader, and leaders inspire change. This is your chance to make a real impact. Her words resonated deep within him, fueling a fire that had been lit by his recent experiences. You're right. I can't let fear dictate my actions, he replied, his resolve hardening. I'll contact the media, gather support from community leaders, and make sure the story is heard. In the following days, Marcus worked tirelessly to outline his plan. He reached out to advocacy groups and began drafting a press release detailing his experience. Each interaction brought more clarity to his mission, and soon he was ready to share his story with the world. As he prepared to speak at a community meeting, he felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Would his message resonate? Would he inspire others to stand up against injustice? The thought sent a thrill of determination through him. He took a deep breath, ready to confront the challenges ahead, not only for himself, but for everyone who had ever felt the weight of discrimination. It was time to turn pain into purpose, to let his story echo in the hearts of those who had suffered in silence for too long. The community center buzzed with energy as Marcus entered the packed room, his heart racing. This was it, his moment to share his story and ignite change. He scanned the audience, noting the diverse faces filled with anticipation. Some were friends and family, while others were community members who had gathered to discuss the pressing issues of racial injustice. Marcus took a deep breath, reminding himself of the importance of this moment. He was no longer just a victim. He was a voice for the voiceless. He approached the podium, adjusting the microphone to his height, and began to speak. Thank you all for being here today, he started, his voice steady. I want to share something personal, something that has changed my life forever. As he recounted the events of his wrongful detention, he felt a mixture of vulnerability and strength. He described the fear and humiliation he faced at the hands of those who were supposed to protect him. The room was silent, hanging on to every word. Being judged based on the color of my skin is not just my experience. It's the reality for so many in our community, he continued, his voice rising with passion. This isn't just a story, it's a call to action. We must demand accountability from those in power and ensure that this never happens to anyone else. As he spoke, he could see the reactions in the audience. Heads nodded, fists clenched in solidarity, and some even wiped away tears. Marcus was reaching them, connecting their shared experiences with his own. He felt empowered, fueled by the energy of the room. "Change starts here in our community," he asserted, emphasizing his points with conviction. "We need to work together to hold our police accountable, to push for training and reforms that address racial biases. It's time to advocate for transparency, to make sure our voices are heard." A ripple of applause erupted, encouraging him to keep going. "I know it won't be easy and there will be obstacles, but we have to stand united. If we want to see real change, we can't be afraid to speak out and demand better." After his speech, Marcus felt a wave of exhilaration wash over him. The crowd approached him, sharing their stories of discrimination and injustice. It was overwhelming yet comforting. He wasn't alone in this fight. One woman, in her 50s with deep brown skin and bright, expressive eyes, stepped forward. "Thank you for sharing your story. I've been scared to speak out, but your words have inspired me," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I appreciate you saying that." "We have to lift each other up," Marcus replied, feeling the weight of their shared struggle. "Together, we can make a difference." As the night continued, he listened to others recount their own encounters with racial profiling and police brutality. Each story was a reminder of the harsh realities many faced daily, fueling his determination to take action. By the end of the evening, Marcus had gathered a wealth of information. He exchanged contact details with several community leaders and activists, forming a coalition dedicated to addressing these pressing issues. They discussed plans to organize rallies, educational programs, and ways to bring the community together. "Let's keep the momentum going," one man suggested, a local pastor known for his activism. "We need to turn this energy into action. We can set up meetings with local officials and hold them accountable." Marcus nodded, energized by the prospect. "Absolutely. It's time to create change, and we're going to do it together." As he left the community center that night, the city lights sparkled against the darkened sky, illuminating his path. He felt lighter, liberated by the collective strength of those around him. Back at home, Tanya greeted him with a warm embrace. "How did it go?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "It was amazing. So many people showed up, and we had powerful discussions about change." "I feel hopeful for the first time in a long time," Marcus replied, his voice brimming with enthusiasm. "That's incredible. I knew you could do it," she beamed, pride radiating from her. "What's next?" "We're planning to set up more meetings, and maybe even some rallies," he explained, feeling the excitement bubble within him. "I want to make sure our voices are heard, and I'm ready to lead the charge." Tanya squeezed his hand, her support unwavering. "You've got this, Marcus. Just remember to take care of yourself, too. This fight is important, but so is your well-being." "I will," he promised, grateful for her encouragement. As he settled into bed that night, Marcus's mind raced with thoughts of the future. He had a renewed sense of purpose, a fire ignited within him. He was ready to confront the challenges ahead, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been silenced for too long. The next morning, he began drafting a detailed plan for their campaign. He envisioned community workshops to educate citizens on their rights, meetings with city officials to discuss police reforms, and partnerships with local media to amplify their voices. He wanted to ensure that his experience sparked a movement, one that would resonate throughout the community and beyond. The weeks following Marcus's speech flew by, each day packed with meetings, rallies, and community discussions. His efforts were paying off. More people were coming forward to share their stories, and a palpable energy for change buzzed through the community. The coalition he had formed was growing stronger, drawing in activists, local leaders, and concerned citizens. One sunny Saturday morning, they gathered for a rally in the park, a beautiful green space at the heart of the city. Colorful banners fluttered in the breeze, emblazoned with slogans demanding justice and accountability. The air was filled with excitement, and Marcus felt a rush of adrenaline as he stood before the crowd, ready to address them once again. Thank you all for coming today, Marcus shouted, his voice echoing across the park. This is our moment to stand together and demand the change we deserve. Each one of us has a story to tell, and today, we're making sure those stories are heard. Cheers erupted from the crowd, their enthusiasm infectious. He glanced at Tanya, who stood nearby, her face lit up with pride. With her support, he felt invincible, like he could tackle any challenge that lay ahead. As he continued his speech, Marcus shared the progress they had made. He detailed the meetings they had held with city officials, the petitions that had garnered thousands of signatures, and the media coverage that had drawn attention to their cause. But we can't stop here, he urged. We need to keep pushing for change. Our voices matter, and we will not be silenced. After his speech, the crowd dispersed into smaller groups, engaging in discussions about the next steps. Marcus moved through the crowd, shaking hands and listening to the concerns of his neighbors. He was struck by the determination in their eyes. It was a reflection of his own resolve. A tall woman with shoulder-length natural hair and fierce brown eyes approached him. I want to thank you for everything you're doing. I felt so alone in this fight, and seeing you stand up has inspired me, she said, her voice steady. I appreciate you saying that, Marcus replied, feeling the weight of her gratitude. We're all in this together. Your voice matters just as much as mine. As the day went on, the rally became a platform for others to share their experiences. A young man spoke about his encounter with police while walking home from work, detailing the fear and confusion he felt. A mother shared her story of her son being wrongfully stopped by officers, emphasizing the anxiety she lived with every day. Each narrative added layers to their mission, reinforcing the urgency for reform. After hours of sharing and discussing, they decided to organize a community forum, a space where residents could voice their concerns directly to local officials. That night, Marcus returned home, feeling a mix of exhilaration and exhaustion. Tanya was waiting for him, a plate of food in hand. You did amazing today, she said, her smile radiant. Thanks, Tanya. I really felt connected to everyone out there, he replied, sitting down to eat. It's incredible how many people are willing to stand up and share their stories. It's like a movement is finally taking shape. Absolutely, she agreed, her expression thoughtful. But have you thought about how this could impact you personally? You're in a powerful position, and not everyone will be happy with the changes you're advocating for. Marcus paused, considering her words. I know there might be backlash, but I can't let fear dictate my actions. People are suffering, and I have the opportunity to help. You're right, but just be careful, Tanya warned gently. You don't want to put yourself in danger. I appreciate your concern. I will be careful. But I'm not backing down, he asserted, determination in his eyes. As the weeks passed, the momentum continued to build. The community forum was scheduled, and anticipation hung in the air. Marcus spent countless hours preparing, researching statistics, and drafting questions he wanted to pose to the officials. He wanted to ensure their voices were heard loud and clear. On the day of the forum, the atmosphere was electric. The venue was packed with residents, journalists, and city officials, all eager to engage in the discussions. Marcus took a deep breath, stepping up to the microphone, feeling the weight of the moment. Thank you all for being here today, he began, his voice strong. This forum is a testament to our community's commitment to change. We are not here to be ignored. We are here to demand action. As the event unfolded, residents voiced their concerns, asking tough questions that left officials squirming. The air was charged with passion, each person fueling the fire for reform. When it was Marcus's turn to speak, he directed his focus at the panel of officials seated in front of him. What measures are you taking to address the racial bias within the police department? How can we trust that our voices will lead to real change? The officials responded with a mix of rehearsed statements and vague promises, But the audience was not easily appeased. They demanded specifics, and with each question, the urgency of their cause resonated louder. As the forum wrapped up, Marcus felt a surge of hope. They had made their voices heard, and the officials could no longer ignore the growing tide of community support for change. That night, as he reflected on the day's events, he realized they were reaching a turning point. The dialogue had been opened, and there was no going back. Together, they would continue to fight for justice, accountability, and the hope for a better future. The aftermath of the community forum rippled throughout the city, igniting conversations and debates in households, schools, and workplaces. Marcus received a flood of messages from people thanking him for his courage and for creating a platform for their voices. Yet, along with the support came backlash from those who felt threatened by the winds of change. One evening, Marcus was scrolling through social media when a post caught his attention. It was a video of a local news segment covering the forum. He watched as the camera panned across the audience, capturing the fervent faces of community members demanding accountability. Then, the clip shifted to an interview with a police officer who claimed that Marcus and the coalition were spreading misinformation and inciting unrest. "This is what happens when people with an agenda try to manipulate the truth," the officer stated, his tone dismissive. "We're here to protect and serve, not to be vilified by individuals looking for attention." Marcus felt a wave of anger wash over him. How could they misrepresent their fight for justice as a personal agenda? He shared the video on his own social media, determined to set the record straight. "Our movement is about transparency and accountability, not hatred towards those in uniform," he wrote, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "We're advocating for change, not conflict." The comments flooded in. Supporters rallied behind him, while others echoed the officer's sentiments. "You're just trying to stir the pot," one commenter wrote, while another said, "You're the real problem, not the police." Though hurtful, Marcus reminded himself that progress often faced resistance. He decided to take the high road, continuing to focus on his mission. The following week, he organized a town hall meeting, inviting not just residents but also police representatives, hoping to facilitate dialogue and bridge the gap. On the day of the meeting, the atmosphere was tense. The room was packed with community members, each eager to express their concerns but wary of the police presence. As the police officers entered, a few murmurs spread through the crowd. Marcus felt the weight of the moment. This was their chance to address the issues head-on. "Thank you all for coming today," he began, attempting to calm the room. "We're here to have an honest conversation about how we can work together to improve our community and rebuild trust." As community members voiced their experiences with police interactions, emotions ran high. A man in his 30s spoke about being stopped and searched for no reason, his voice shaking with frustration. "We're not criminals. We're just trying to live our lives," he exclaimed, drawing nods of agreement from the crowd. When it was the police's turn to respond, Marcus watched closely. The chief of police stood up, his expression serious. "I understand your concerns, and I acknowledge that there are issues within our department that need addressing. But we are not the enemy. We want to work together to find solutions," he said, attempting to calm the crowd. Some attendees were receptive, but others remained skeptical. "How can we trust you after everything we've been through?" a woman shouted from the back. Marcus stepped in, trying to mediate. "Trust is built through consistent actions, not just words," he asserted. "Let's discuss concrete steps we can take moving forward." As the meeting continued, ideas flowed. Community policing initiatives, training programs focusing on racial sensitivity, and regular town hall meetings to keep the dialogue open. The more they discussed, the more the atmosphere shifted from hostility to collaboration. When the meeting concluded, Marcus felt a sense of accomplishment. They hadn't solved everything, but they had taken a crucial step towards bridging the divide. As he stepped outside, he was greeted by Tanya, who had been waiting for him. "How did it go?" she asked, her eyes scanning his face for answers. "It went better than I expected," he replied, feeling a surge of optimism. The police chief was open to our suggestions. "I think we're making progress." "That's amazing. I knew you could do it," she beamed, wrapping her arms around him in a tight embrace. But that night, as Marcus tried to unwind, he couldn't shake a feeling of unease. The backlash he faced online was intensifying. He knew that not everyone would accept the changes they were fighting for. As he lay in bed, he heard the familiar sound of police sirens outside his window. They were becoming all too common. He turned to Tanya, who was scrolling through her phone, her brow furrowed with concern. "More protests planned for this weekend," she said, glancing up at him. "Some people are worried about violence breaking out." "I understand their fears," Marcus replied, his voice heavy with contemplation. "But we can't back down now. We have to keep advocating for change, no matter the cost." "Just promise me you'll be careful," she pleaded, worry etched across her face. "This is becoming dangerous." "I will. But I can't let fear dictate my actions," he reassured her, gripping her hand tightly. As sleep eluded him that night, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something monumental. But with that potential came risk. The fight for justice was never easy, and he knew they had to be prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead. The day of the protest dawned bright and clear, but the air was thick with tension. Marcus woke up early, feeling a mix of anticipation and anxiety. As he prepared for the event, he reviewed his notes for the speech he planned to deliver. He wanted to inspire hope while acknowledging the real challenges they faced. Tanya stood by his side, her expression serious. "You're ready for this," she said, adjusting the collar of his shirt. "Just remember to stay focused and don't let anyone provoke you. We need to keep this peaceful." "I know," he replied, forcing a smile. "But we need to make sure our voices are heard." As they arrived at the protest site, Marcus was taken aback by the turnout. Thousands of people filled the streets, their voices rising in a chorus of demands for justice and reform. Banners waved above the crowd, each carrying powerful messages of solidarity and hope. Marcus felt a surge of pride as he surveyed the scene. This was more than just a protest. It was a movement. It was a community coming together to fight for their rights. He stepped onto the stage, his heart pounding in his chest as he took the microphone. "Thank you for being here today," he shouted, his voice ringing out over the crowd. "This is our moment to stand together, united in our fight for justice." Cheers erupted, filling him with energy. "We've come a long way, but our work is far from over. We're not just fighting against police brutality. We're fighting for accountability, for transparency, and for the right to live without fear." As he spoke, Marcus noticed a group of police officers stationed nearby, their expressions unreadable. A knot formed in his stomach, but he pushed through, focusing on the faces in the crowd. The community's energy was electric, and he couldn't let anything distract him. He continued, weaving in stories from the community, stories of pain and resilience. "Every voice matters," he insisted. "We cannot let anyone silence us. Together, we will bring about change." After his speech, the crowd erupted into cheers. The energy was contagious, and Marcus felt invincible. But just as the march began, a commotion broke out at the front. A small group of counter-protesters had arrived, holding signs that read, "Blue Lives Matter," and "Stop the Hate." Marcus felt the tension in the air shift as anger surged through the crowd. "Stay calm," he shouted, trying to regain control. "We're here for a peaceful protest. Don't let them provoke you." Despite his efforts, a few individuals from the crowd shouted back at the counter-protesters, and the situation quickly escalated. Fists were raised, and Marcus could see the fear and confusion spreading among the attendees. Suddenly, a loud voice cut through the chaos. "This isn't why we're here." It was Tanya, stepping forward, her eyes fierce. "We came to demand justice, not to engage in a fight. Let's show them the strength of our unity." Her words hung in the air, and slowly, the crowd began to calm. Marcus watched as people took deep breaths, remembering the purpose of their gathering. They were there to advocate for change, not to create division. "Thank you, Tanya," he said, stepping back into the forefront. "This is a peaceful movement. We're here to express our frustrations, but we will do it with dignity and respect. Let's continue our march." As they moved forward, the atmosphere began to shift again. Songs broke out, and people started to chant the names of victims of police brutality, creating a powerful rhythm that drowned out the negativity. Marcus felt the weight of the moment. This was what they had been fighting for: unity, community, and a chance to be heard. They marched through the streets, their voices echoing off the buildings, demanding justice with every step. As they reached the end of the route, the crowd gathered in a park, where various community leaders and activists took turns speaking. Marcus listened, feeling a swell of pride. They had created a platform for everyone to share their stories, their pain, and their hopes for the future. Finally, it was time for him to speak again. As he stepped up to the microphone, he looked out at the faces before him, determined, hopeful, and ready for change. "Today, we have shown our strength," he began. "This is just the beginning. We will not stop until we achieve justice for all." The crowd roared, their energy lifting him higher. They were a force to be reckoned with, and he could feel the momentum building. After the speeches, as the crowd began to disperse, Marcus felt a sense of accomplishment wash over him. They had faced challenges, but together, they had created something beautiful, an unwavering commitment to fighting for justice. As he and Tanya walked home, hand in hand, he couldn't help but smile. "We did it," he said, feeling hopeful for the future. "Yes, we did," she replied, her eyes sparkling with pride. "And we'll keep doing it, one step at a time." With the sun setting behind them, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had come together to demand change. And while the journey ahead would be long, he knew they would face it together.